We had a community building which has to do everything on Iona, and it was at reaching the end of its natural life, and we needed to undertake an options appraisal to decide whether we refurbish that building or replace it with a new one.
They weren't used to running brief development workshops with the architects there as well. But we decided it was really good to do that together.
It's such an essential kind of part of quality of life on the island, and kind of stopping people from getting too isolated and kind of creating that sense of community. It's right at the heart of that. And so one of the main things that the building tries to address is this kind of sense of it being somewhere that can provide space for all of these different activities, but that it can also act as a kind of living room for the community. So we took that as our kind of core part of the response in the building design is to create these series of kind of different flexible spaces that can intermingle and overlap. And at the heart of that, there is this gathering space, which is like the kind of the island's living room with sofas and a fire, a hearth, and also just letting as much of the island views of it and the sights and the sounds of the island kind of flooding through it, and there being a sense of permeability to the building.
It has a sort of double aspect to it, in that it's a part of the village, but it's also on the edge of the village, and it's viewed almost like a standalone object building from the south across field. So it had to have the right scale and form and colour and feel and sense of embedment in the landscape from the south as well, where it's not perceived quite so much as an urban building, whereas it is on its other side with its close relationships to the Carnegie Library and School.
So there's two principal pitched roof forms which have blue zinc roofs to kind of tie in with the slate roofing of lots of the buildings in the village, so it kind of has a sense of belonging with that. And similarly, the kind of white rendered masonry is something that you see kind of over and over again in the existing context. There's these lower stone walls which wrap around the terraces of the building to kind of root the building down into the ground, with stonework that principally came from a quarry at Tormore, which is just over the Sound of Iona near Finnefort. The old hall had been the kind of like the scene and the witness for some of the most important events in their life. Those memories are kind of still contained in a way in the fabric of the building.
That the dance floor was one of the most important elements that came up again and again and again. That felt like a really important part of the building to try and bring into the new hall. So the stage in the new hall is floored with the old hall floor, and two etched glazing panels from the entranceway are set in the new hall as well. And people are just absolutely delighted when they see it.
Iona has many kind of beautiful sunny days where it looks absolutely kind of sparkling and Caribbean, but equally there's a very harsh climate, particularly in the winter. So the palette of materials was chosen to be able to be as kind of low maintenance and robust as possible, and to be natural materials that would weather in a kind of graceful way that suited the context that they're in. It's highly insulated. We spent a lot of time working with the contractor to ensure that it had good air tightness, because the kind of wind factor on Iona is quite extreme at times, and that sense of permeability to the building means that it has a huge amount of natural daylight that kind of floods right through the building, and it uses an air source heat pump system, so heating is kind of low maintenance and simple to use.
Ultimately, it needed to run on the same budget as we ran the old hall, not just financial resources, but community resources. And remarkably, we seem to be on track.
The backstory to that project is still one of a team of people that have consistently worked really well together. The building hopefully will be a kind of testament to that same sense of kind of community support. that, you know, it's more than the sum of its parts.
The Thackray Medical Museum had grown into the largest and probably most influential medical museum in the north, definitely. And it had all of the challenges that an old complicated Victorian building had. There was water coming through the roof, there was damp coming into the stonework. The circulation in the building really militated against people getting to enjoy the collection.
Well, we were given the brief to renovate the galleries, modernise facilities, improve accessibility and provide a more welcoming and attractive visitor experience.
There was a confusion about how visitors went around the building, and the central space was very cluttered.
The immediate visitor experience when they walk through the door is they're met with this grand Victorian stair hall, and then immediately after that, a solid wall.
And there were parts of the building which were not only inaccessible, but actually very difficult to find. There's a whole sort of rear wing that was cut off. We proposed to introduce a new atrium and a new stair in the centre of the building, which would shed light into the heart of the building, make it far more welcoming.
To give more spaces for people to gather and get to grips with where things are. The reception is no longer tucked away in the middle of a hallway. It's got its own kind of space, and just by doing that, I think we've improved the visitor flow. We've given a kind of orientation point.
It sort of created a route through to what we're calling the core of the building, which is a whole sort of suite of rooms and facilities, which we've, as a result of the kind of consultation that we've been doing, have more or less handed over to the community for a whole load of different uses. So, for example, we hosted follow-up trials for vaccine trials for coronavirus vaccine. In fact, we also hosted the full-on vaccination centre, the first museum anywhere to do that.
It's really interesting to see those new uses with the community actually developing out of an architectural concept. But the atrium itself, with its tiling, which sort of reflects, is a very exciting space. And actually, it was Nat's idea to suddenly have this coronavirus lantern in the middle, and that works so well.
We selected materials primarily to try and complement the existing fabric. We've used a different format of tile to the original, but we can try to replicate the colour of the original. So there's still that dialogue between old and new.
The area in Leeds where the museum is an area called Bermontofts, and Bermontofts was the producer of Bermontoft tiling, which is, you know, was exported all over the world, and the museum staircase and you know, core is absolutely full of these beautiful Bermontoft tiles.
And we worked closely with the exhibition designer to specify the appropriate type of paint for them, because they were putting vinyls and things on the walls, so we need to make sure that the surfaces were appropriate for the exhibition that was going to be put on the walls. Yeah, there was before we even looked at the interior of the building and the design there was a series of repairs that were carried out primarily at roof level. As the condition survey had identified, there were a lot of areas that were needing urgent attention. We identified that actually the building has a lot of space that it wasn't really used. In a way, by rethinking how the inside of the building is arranged, we've managed to minimise the amount of materials we've had to use, and we've not needed to put an extension on. Has helped us hopefully make the building slightly more sustainable.
All of the display cases and exhibition galleries and so on now have, you know, low energy LEDs. We have a sort of passive kind of air handling system which brings in cold air at night and then releases it during the day. So that was an existing system which had fallen into disrepair, and that's all been reconditioned and created, so it means we don't have to bring in any kind of additional air conditioning in the space to maintain the museum. We did some surveys before we started the project into how people were using the museum, and we found that an enormous number of people, despite the fact they paid admission, didn't go onto the first floor. And we found that since we've done the project, I'd say, you know, 99% of people visit the whole museum. So the whole museum is just working better. It's just working better.
This project was for UK's largest sawmill in Lockerbie, and they wanted to make what they called a visitor centre, which is really for people who would come and find out more about what their business does. A lot of the people who come to see the building are people who buy the products from the supplier. And so the client had this need for the building to be interesting, but not too interesting. They didn't want it to look bling and expensive, and then the buyers say, well, obviously we're paying too much for our timber. I found that in particular to be an interesting, sort of a good brief for us, because we like to do things that are quite subtle, not too kind of in your face. Our key design move was to use all of the timber that this sawmiller produces. So they are particularly well known for something called JJ joists, James Jones eye joists, which are timber, like an eye joist in steel but in timber. And so we used that as our main structure in the building. And then we used their timber throughout. So they only mill softwood. So the majority of the building is softwood. We have used oak floors for durability, but everywhere else it's Douglas fir or larch or pine, normal kind of carcassing timber. And the idea is we showcase that timber and how it can be used in a building. So the design is based on these two buildings that are next to each other, and the reason for doing that was to do with the spans that you can easily make in timber. So it meant rather than having big open plan steel, we were trying to avoid the use of steel. So rather than have big span buildings, we were having these two smaller buildings with pitched roofs. It's a very industrial site. Most of the buildings around here are sort of steel sheds with steel cladding. And so it was an interesting place to put this little building, and for it not to feel very small and domestic in scale. I think one of the things that helped us was the height, so we could be very tall above. We used a black base to give it some gravitas, some weight, which we felt was important. And at a higher level, we've used a finish called a CU, which weathers the timber, accelerates the weathering, so you get a very even light grey colour finish. There was also an existing timber, little low kind of log cabin from the 1970s, which we were connecting our building to, and we did that with a glass link building. So the building has two functions. On the ground floor, there's a wing of offices. There's 4 offices, it houses about 15 people, and then on the other side we have sort of ancillary things: a plant room, a meeting room, and a kitchenette for staff to use. But the main function was above that was to have a big meeting room. So that meeting room can hold 60 people, up to 100 standing. That room has been designed to have the best view. So it's on the first floor, this big panoramic window which looked over how the timbers arrive. It also has a function as a kind of ceilidh. The idea was that they might use it as a function room or for special events. One of the interesting things in the roof upstairs is very narrow rafters. The rafters are 160 by 25 millimeters thick, and that 25 millimeters became one of the key things on the project. We used Douglas fir. Douglas fir is the most stable softwood. I think it's a beautiful wood. It's sustainably available. It's grown all over Scotland, and it's got a lovely colour and can be as dimensionally stable as oak. So we've ended up with this kind of pinkish hue to the roof, on the roof rafters. So, I mean, at the heart of this project was sustainability. I mean, timber is inherently sustainable, and so our idea was to use it throughout the building. So that was walls, floor, structure, and there is some steel in the building, especially around the big glazed windows at the end, but otherwise the structure is all timber. We used wood wool insulation as our insulation method. We had very thick walls that allowed for a lot of insulation, and one of the key things for us was using their JJI joists. We staggered the JJI joists so they were offset, and that gave us avoided any cold bridges through the wall, and we could fulfill those with insulation. We also have an air source heat pump that provides the heating. We have a car charging point. Adjacent to the site there's there's an electricity producing from waste. So any waste from this mill goes to that and is used to generate electricity. I like the timber post we have internally, which holds up. It's part of the structure, and that was because we were using glulam beams, and it was slightly too long for the glulam to work, so we needed a post. And one of the larch logs, as it arrives, was debarked and just left in the building. And I like how that expresses what the building does. But this is a very eco-friendly building.
What If was originally part of Scotland's submission to the Venice Biennale in 2020, and it was a response to the question, how do we live together? And the response we came up with was just get architects working more directly with communities to explore their ambitions and hopes for the future and come up with ideas which will bring about transformational change.
Technically, the exhibition had been designed for the venue in Venice, and then that was cancelled, and then we went to V&A. So in terms of the brief, they had to shift the brief in spatially for a very, very different place, and we had to add additional elements to make it work in a serious spaces rather than a big space in Venice that we'd found.
But also the project took on board another strand, which was What If Dundee, and subsequently done 5 workshops for communities in Dundee, which form part of the exhibition as well, and has been a live, ongoing event through the whole course of the exhibition. The exhibition at V&A Dundee has really kind of captured the engagement process, these conversations around the 5 different places, from Lerwick and Shetland in the very, very north, down to Annan in the south, with Wester Hales, Paisley and Elgin in between. So the engagement conversations has been captured in a range of different media in the exhibition. First of all, there's the panels which capture the citizens' wishes and the architects' ideas. There is a series of 5 films which were made, which captured the workshops and engagement in each of the 5 places, and where the citizens talked about their wishes and the architects talked about their ideas. And there's also what we've come to call the Cloud of Dreams, which is where all of the wishes from the citizens and the citizens in Dundee who took part in the Dundee workshops, which have run alongside the exhibition, plus visitors to the exhibition, write their wish for the future of their place on a card and put it in a bowl, which we call the wishing well, and then it ends up in the cloud. So it's a very, in a way, theatrical, but a very kind of engaging process. So we wanted to create an exhibition which the public would be very engaged in, and they can engage in at different levels, from a very quick, cursory look around the what if panels with the ideas and wishes, or they could spend more time in a much more immersive experience in the watching the films, which are they're effectively a triptych, kind of triple with very immersive experience with a super wide screen. The key thing is to engage people in thinking about what might be possible in their places, and thinking about how things might be influenced to create better futures for these places.
Because they worked in 5 places with at the minimum 25 citizens and 25 designers to present these ideas, which are very far reaching in terms of what people came up with. So to present them in a way that was equal, with equal voices, was an important thing to do. Really, we were looking at the issue of sustainable communities in the future in a very, very broad sense. But having said that, the energy dimension was a key part of a lot of the discussions and the hopes and dreams coming from the citizens. You know, for example, in Lerwick and Shetland, one of the citizens was very concerned about how the town would adapt to rising sea levels. So the project, the idea which evolved from that, was about how Lerwick, a place which has evolved in such a close relationship with the sea, which sustained that relationship while still protecting the community from rising sea levels. It's a very kind of wide-ranging set of responses which look at sustainable futures for communities in a very holistic way. What was very key was that nobody wanted to make new buildings. A lot of people, without prompting, looked at what was already there. You know, a reuse of an existing building, or something that meant that young people would stay, or it was more useful to people, especially young people. On the other end of sustainability is that the boards that we've made, the graphic boards, we're quite keen that they all go back to the citizens so that they can have them hanging in their house. So we're not going to chuck them in the skip. furniture that we've used, that will all be recycled and given away or reused somewhere or other. So at the end of the day, there'll be very, very little left of that exhibition. And because it's about film, then the waste is absolutely minimal.
I think the key thing is the advocacy dimension to this, and it's already influencing how Dundee City Council are looking at doing engagement involving architects in the future.
We didn't just drop in and drop out. We're actually going to go back to all of them and ask what has changed since this project happened.
The hope is that the whole initiative will have a life beyond the exhibition, and it will be a strong influence on how architects work more directly with communities in the future.
The thing about it is it's a very simple thing, just to ask people what if. And from that comes these amazing ideas and these amazing conversations and potentially legacy.